Hey, Mark, what's happening?
Hey, what's going on?
Hey, I'm a massive fan. I think you do such a great job at.
Dude, I'm just honored to be on with you, so it's the complete other way around.
Oh well, I appreciate that. I like you're the best at it. And I was kind of before we start actually talking about like the main thing and making the main thing the main thing. Like
Yep.
when you because your voice, like you're so good at it, and you have the voice. Like I was always okay at it, but I didn't have the voice. But what was like your first like entryway into being a broadcaster? Did you? Because I did Division II basketball and football. Did you do high school? Did you do small colleges or anything?
You know, what I did was I took my tape recorder up into the crowd. I was at Syracuse University as a chemical engineering major, and I decided this is what I always wanted to do, even though my parents, were like, no, broadcasting's not the route to go. And then I did small college, D3, D2, D1, and then I kind of gave up on the dream while I was doing studio stuff in Albany and Cleveland. And then when I got to ESPN, I just kept pounding on the door and finally got a shot. And I don't know how I'm here right now, to be honest with you. It took a while, but I got here.
I know why you're here because the cream always eventually rises. But when you go to ESPN, when you're hired at ESPN, what was your job description for what you were going to do initially?
When I was hired there, it was to do updates. They call them Sports Center updates for ESPN Radio every 20 minutes. And I swore that when I told my wife, I said, I'm going to be working overnights, I guarantee you. And they said, no, you're going to be in the evenings, from 7 to midnight. And I was thrilled. Game night was a big show back then, as ESPN was just getting into 24/7 radio. And so, top of the hour, 20 past, 40 past, I would do 2-3 minute sports updates. And it was about a year after that I filled in on our Major League Baseball coverage, being the pregame host, postgame host. And the guy who was in charge of that was in charge of play-by-play. And that's how I kind of maneuvered my way after a number of years.
The hardest thing for me was I would travel and do football play-by-play, and we were home. I had a color guy that was with me. Now, again, we're Division II in a small town in Arkansas. Nobody cares. But when the color guy was with me, fine. But I would travel, and the school didn't have any real money, so they would send me by myself. And when we would get beat like 70-3, it was miserable calling a game. So do you have like backup plans for if – for some reason the game is stopped and you just have something you can start talking about?
Yeah, what's funny is all the days in between games or the week in between a football game, I put together this massive chart, color-coded, every thought that comes into my head that just in case we get 70-3, what do I want to talk about? What's the most interesting thing I want to talk about? And then, of course, most weeks you just leave it on the table. You got a good game. But I always like to have a game plan. What's the biggest thing we want to talk about, big picture, and then kind of dial it down. And the nice thing is with all the analysts that I work with over the years, try to have a lunch, have a dinner, pick their brains. And it always turns out I'm working material because that's the stuff I go to when we have a bad game.
Do you get to or how much access do you have, because now you're covering the finals, but how much access do you have to players or coaches to kind of understand their philosophy about the last game or the game coming up?
Depends on what sport we're doing. The NBA is, for me, since I'm on one of their top games every week or two games, we always have coach access, which is great, where it's just our little ESPN radio unit for 10 minutes. Today it'll be Eric Spoelstra from the Heat, Michael Malone from Denver. And then in the finals, we'll expand to a player or two each where it's just the 5 or 6 of us in the room. And, sometimes you have to navigate, most times you have to navigate through the coach speak. But every once in a while, we've built a good trust with many of the coaches, and they will trust us with information. And you can disseminate some of the stuff that, maybe is right up on the edge of what's good for on the air, what's not appropriate for on the air, and you just have to kind of figure it out. But we get great access in the NBA for sure.
Tell me about Spo for a second, because unfairly, when he was coaching LeBron and Bosh and Wade all together, you're like, well, they win the titles. Obviously, they're going to win the titles. He didn't have to be a good coach to do that. But now he has ascended to one of the best coaches in the NBA, or at least that's what everybody tells me. And I think what he's done with the Heat this year has been an example of that. But what does he like to talk to? And after you spend time with him, do you go, oh, yeah, I get it now?
You know what? We kind of figured out early on, the late, great Dr. Jack Ramsey, who was so special to this league and to this game, had known Eric since he was a young boy, because Eric's dad was an executive with the Portland Trailblazers, where Dr. Jack was in the late 70s. And so we got the sense early on that even as a 25-year-old video guy, video room guy, that he just understood the game. And I think, when LeBron comes and, they're in the midst of a 9-8 start and there's this big maelstrom as they go back to Cleveland, you're wondering if Pat Riley's going to descend back from the front office. He had so much trust in Eric that he let him ride it out to 4 straight championship series and 2 titles. And he's the same guy. I mean, he just gets it. He has a knack. He's good at also not divulging what he wants to do. He will make sure that if you get a little too close to the X and O, he'll divert you in a certain way. But when the cameras are off and the lights are off, you can get a little quiet time with him and maybe get inside what he really wants to do, if he trusts you, which he does with our crew.
I've been able to watch a bunch of some Denver games. The time zone's a bit later, and I have League Pass, and so I'd watch some Jokic games. I don't think I was as clueless about how good that he is like a lot of my other friends who are casual NBA fans, because I do have the League Pass that I watch. Now, do you think if the league voted for MVP after the playoffs and the finals, that he would have won the 3rd MVP in a row?
I think it would have been a landslide. I am one of the voters. I don't know if there was 100 or 101 voters, and I voted for Joker last year in an incredibly tight race. I thought Embiid could have won it. This year, I was also confronted with, we've got 3 great centers, if you want to include Giannis in that position. Who do you vote for? And it just felt like with Embiid's closing run and the fact that, I shorted him last year, I voted for Joel Embiid. I still feel fine with that as a regular season vote. But your point is well taken. He's in a time zone that a lot of people don't stay up. I'm a League Pass-aholic like you. And now to see it up close every day, we were on the Western Conference Finals as well. He's going to be one of the, I don't know if I say top 20 players of all time in this league. And, if we revoted, I think the Joker might be a 3-time MVP.
I think what hurts him, too, is the same thing that hurts Heisman candidates to play in California, is that we don't get to see them as much if you're on the East Coast or Central Time Zone. And because we're not constantly exposed to them, they don't really exist as much to us, so we're not as passionate about them. I know it happens with Heisman voters. Would you say that it a bit has hurt Jokic?
I think a little bit, but I think also is he doesn't look the part. I mean, he doesn't. When you look at him, he's just so massive, and even though he's sculpted his body, if I want to put in quotation marks, he's done a really good job of getting in great shape. It's just not sexy what he does, and clearly it doesn't move the needles nationally, like the big brands do. But when you watch him day to day, it's hard to imagine a guy where you can throw multiple defenses at him. You can try to change things up, and he's always going to make the right play. If he's got guys with him who can hit shots, it's almost impossible to defend. And that's what we saw the other day. Like, Denver didn't make all the shots they made in game 1. And even though, tons of credit to Miami's defense in the game 2 win, and I think they're going to try to do the same type of stuff to Jokic, he's just so devastating, especially, during a season. Series are different because you're just adjusting, readjusting. Whereas, teams are coming in on a back-to-back into Denver. You haven't seen Jokic all year if you're in the East. And that makes it so much harder to defend him. But he's just incredible. He's a different look, and I think this is the big stage he needed to kind of put himself out on that pedestal. Are
these European guys a bit more cerebral at just basketball in general, in your opinion?
I think we're evening out a little bit, but I do think the last, from Dirk Nowitzki on, where the skill set, the drills they do at earlier ages, FIBA being on a shorter clock than college, in high school, they're making decisions a lot quicker. I think that is a benefit to the Europeans and to other parts of the world, that they're thinking the game a lot differently than, the North Americans have been, although I think that's evening out of late.
The big scandal, the possible scandal, is Taylor Swift's tour. Everywhere she's been, they've lost. She's going to Denver. She's not going to Miami. I mean, is it with Jimmy and Taylor Swift? Is that how Miami's going to pull this out?
They may have to, Bobby. I might bring that up in today's interviews. We're only about 15 minutes away. I hadn't been tracking the Taylor tour except to compare how much money she's going to make versus, I think, the entire NBA as a whole.
Everywhere that she's been has lost. And she's going to Denver soon, and she's not going to Miami at all. That's all we're saying. Listen, I didn't come up with it. I saw it on TikTok, but I mean, it's there. It's looking us right in the eyes. Just a couple.
I don't care where you got it, Bobby. I'm gonna say I heard from my good friend Bobby Bones.
Yes.
I'm going with that.
All right, two final questions. So with Miami winning Game 2, which I will admit was a shock to me after watching them just get crushed in Game 1, although they did come right off that series. They did go to Denver where you don't breathe as well when you run. Game 2, they win. I mean, can this thing go 6 or 7 games?
All of a sudden, I think, yes, it's amazing how the narrative changes on one result, right? I mean, if Murray hits that 3 and we go overtime, who knows? Denver maybe wins. Now we're second-guessing if Eric Spoelstra should have fouled, up 3. But the result changes everything in that now you see it with your own, 2 eyes that, this team is dogged defensively. They've kept Denver under 110 in both, and it comes down to making shots. I know we always say it, and it's awful to keep repeating it's a make-or-miss league, but that's exactly what it is for Miami. This team is so proficient at three-point shooting, especially in the playoffs, and they could not have been worse in Game 1. They make their shots in Game 2, and now they're home for Game 3 where you feel the role players will be even better. So, yeah, all of a sudden you feel that if Denver gets a split, it feels pretty good, and that means we're going to Denver for a 2-2 and a guarantee of a 6 game. So I think it does feel like it's going a little bit longer.
All right, final question. And I wouldn't ask this if you weren't the know-all. In my mind, you are the know-all. And I do want to talk about LeBron. I don't think he's retiring. I doubt you do as well. But that's not really the question. But you can add that here. But with Bronny going to USC and LeBron wants to play with Bronny, do they really think Bronny's going to be a one and done? Or will he be a one and it doesn't matter? He's just going to be done even if he's not ready for the NBA?
It's a great question. He's not retiring. There's no way. He's not going to Dallas. I don't think that's going to happen unless Bronny's transferring to SMU or something. I don't know if he's a one and done. I haven't seen him play in person. But what's fascinating to me is even if he isn't, we're in a normal situation, perhaps, if a team was angling once LeBron has free agency status again to say, hey, package deal, we will take your son and you can come play for us. That's always been one of those little scenarios that's been rolling out there for the last few years. I will say this from people who do watch prep basketball, and I have to admit, I really don't. I mean, I see the guys who are getting ready for the draft and are a part of our draft coverage, so that's when I kind of clue into them. And Bronny's still, a few months away from getting into the kind of stuff I would watch. I've been told that his game is improving and that he's a pretty good ball player. Whether or not, good enough for the league, we'll find out in time for sure.
ESPN Radio's coverage, Game 3, Wednesday, 6:30 p.m. Central Time. So do the math, figure out where your time zone is. Hey, Mark, huge fan. I know you got a meeting to go to, but you're the best at what you do, and thank you for your time, my friend.
I appreciate that. That means a lot coming from you. Big fan the other way.
All right, see you, buddy.